Hello, you're listening to Overdoing It, the Rhode Island Library podcast. Welcome to another episode of Overdoing It, where our team of library workers dish about their latest reads, views, and passions alongside fascinating conversations with local luminaries. I'm your host, Tayla, and the branch librarian at the Oaklawn Branch Library, and my pronouns are she, her. Let's dive in and discover our guests for today.
All right, I am Alicia Vaandering. My pronouns are she, her, and I am an assistant professor and the head of instruction at the University of Rhode Island, where I support the research needs of our students and our broader community as well. I'm really excited to be here with everyone today talking about our research project into queer picture books.
And hi, everyone. My name is James Rosenzweig. I use he, him pronouns. I'm at Eastern Washington University, which is located in Cheney, Washington, just outside of Spokane. I'm the Education and Children's Studies librarian at Eastern Washington University, which means I get to spend a lot of my day playing with picture books and young adult novels and graphic novels. It's exciting. And another part of my job on the library faculty is that I get to work with wonderful people like Alicia, whom you just met, and like Amanda, whom you're about to meet.
And I'm Amanda Melilli, and my official title is Head of the Teacher Development and Resources Library at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. What that means is I'm similar to James, where I am basically the children's and young adult literature librarian here, and I get to work with students and faculty in the College of Ed, students who are going to become teachers, teachers in the community, and helping to connect them with great children's and young adult books that they can use with their current or future students.
Right, fantastic. So as you all alluded to in your intros, a little bit later in the show, we're going to talk about the research project that you three have done together, looking into LGBTQIA+ representation in children's literature, in picture books specifically. And you also, in honor of Pride Month, will share some of your favorite picks of books that you've encountered while doing this research. But before we get into that, let's start off as we always do with what have you been reading?
Well, I have a sort of an ongoing, we call ourselves a two-person book club. It's just me and a friend, but we pick books and we talk about them. He's a professor at the University of Wisconsin, so he really likes to dive deep into whatever we're reading. And right now we just finished reading the Orsinian Tales, which are a sort of lesser known project of Ursula Le Guin's. It's one of her rare pieces where she doesn't write science fiction. It's realistic fiction set in Eastern Europe. And that was really fascinating. And then we've shifted back from that to our more usual genre reading. We've just started reading Anne Leckie's Ancillary Justice, which was a real award-winning, celebrated sci-fi novel about a decade ago that does some interesting stuff with gender, a society in which gender is not really understood, and therefore everyone is referred to using she, her pronouns. So it's interesting. We're only about a third of the way in, but we're having a really good time. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that another current reading experience I'm having is I am reading The Lord of the Rings aloud to my 11-year-old. We're outside the gates of Minas Tirith right now. We're having a great time.
My partner and I are listening to the audiobooks of Lord of the Rings. We just finished Fellowship.
Oh, wonderful.
James, I just started The Hobbit last night with my kiddo.
Hey!
So it's just a family affair now.
Great. Great.
I love it. Tolkien for everyone.
Indeed.
Always. I am a huge Hunger Games fan, so of course my big excitement has been on the more recent release of Sunrise on the Reaping. I did read that Friday in one sitting without getting up. I loved it so much. It is, of course, for those who are familiar with the series, it's going to be covering Haymitch's games, which were the second quarter quell and the 50th anniversary of the Hunger Games. And we get to re-meet some amazing characters from other books. I don't want to give any spoilers, though, but it was truly wonderful. I've also been reading, because I'm on the Rainbow book list this year, so we read queer children's and YA books and middle grade books as well. So I read this awesome book called It's a Love Skate Relationship, which is about this girl who, Amanda's nodding. Have you read this, Amanda, yet?
I have not read it yet, but it is on my radar.
It's so wonderful. It's about a young girl who's a hockey player, and through a series of events, she is not allowed to play hockey, and she's forced to go from her private school to a public school, where she agrees to be the figure skating partner for this one girl whose partner has temporarily been taken out of commission, basically. And it's about the relationship that develops between them, the friendship and the romance, of course, as well. But it was very sweet. I really, really loved it. And then the picture book that I brought, because I always have to bring a picture book if I'm going to come to something like this, is Bobby and the Big Valentine, which is really sweet. It's about these two young boys who are best friends. And like for Halloween, like one of them will go as like the prince and the other is his knight. And it's about how it's approaching Valentine's Day. And Bobby really wants to get his best friend a Valentine to show him that he's like his person. And how he approaches, like, how am I going to make this Valentine that's actually going to cover all that I love about my person? And then kind of his nervousness, too, as he approaches giving away his Valentine. But it's truly beautiful. It's a lot like a book called Love, Violet, which all of us are big fans of, too.
Alicia, I met a cat named Katniss on Saturday night.
What? Oh, I love that so much.
Playing board games. But yeah, when I met Katniss, I said, well, we got to stop and talk about the Hunger Games. And I thought of your reading experience.
It's amazing. Yeah. Well, I would love to share some of the things I love reading right now, but I'm actually on the Stonewall Book Award committee, so I can't talk about a lot of the things that I'm reading. So I'm going to go the exact opposite of James's very academic, and I'll just talk about some of the manga I've been reading because I am a big manga fan. One that I've really gotten into lately is Apothecary Diaries, and it's a little strange because it all takes place in like this inner court of concubines for the emperor, but there's this one, the main character is like this apothecary detective and she has to navigate this while basically not wanting to cause waves or get attention because she doesn't want to be executed for saying the wrong thing to the wrong person. And so it's very fun because it's all apothecary, but also detective-y. And then, of course, I'm still loving the series Blue Period about a student who decides to go to art school, and it's just lovely. Yeah, I really wish I could talk about some of the other books because there's some really, really fun books coming out. But like as James said, I just started The Hobbit with my kiddo, and he is enjoying that. He thought the dwarves showing up in the beginning was hilarious, and that got him hooked. So I will say, if you haven't checked out the Stonewall winners that were just announced, you should do that because Canto Cantigo was one of my absolute favorite books. And Lunar Boy is beautiful too. So I can talk about those. So I'd recommend those.
So it actually kind of works out with our through line of queer books, not queer books for young people. This is an adult novel, but I'm currently reading The House in the Cerulean Sea. Yes, and I know I'm a little late to the party on it, but I'm about halfway through now, and I really am enjoying it. All of the different children with their different personalities really get me, and I laugh out loud sometimes, and then my partner will give me side eye because he's all like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Enjoying the book." What do you mean? What am I doing? Because he's not a like laugh out loud at a book kind of person, but I am. I fully will just be like, just like hear from the other room. He'd just be like, "Ah." And then and then no other sounds for 20 minutes. Yeah. So it's funny though, there is more plotline going on than the romance plotline going on here, but like the more that I read things with a romance plotline now, the more that I like see all the little signs, and I'm just like, yeah, the main character keeps just being like, I don't know why this man makes me feel this way. And I'm like, because you're super gay, bro. Like, what? It's like, I don't understand what's happening to me. I do. Yeah, I've seen it from 40 miles away. But it still doesn't make it any less enjoyable. It's still like, because it's kind of like, when are you going to get it? We're all on board. When are you going to get on board? So that's kind of where I'm at now.
Tayla, you're sort of describing the experience of reading The Lord of the Rings to an 11-year-old who is open-minded and therefore thinks everyone is into everyone.
Oh my God.
Obviously, It's there.
But also, I understand it was a different time that he wrote it, so like these words didn't have these connotations when he wrote it.
Yes.
Tolkien uses the word queer so
lot.
much.
So much.
So much.
Every time it comes up, my daughter starts bouncing on the couch. Yeah.
Yeah.
It just means that they're weird. This person is just being mean. I'm sorry.
Astonishingly, the only relationship she's not on board with is Legolas and Gimli.
Why not?
I said, like, oh, Legolas is going to walk around minus Tirith with his dwarf boyfriend. She's like, what are you talking about? They're not into each other. I think, how are you missing that subtext?
I just had this queer subtext with my kiddo yesterday about Sonic the Hedgehog characters because I did not realize that they're not allowed apparently in the franchise to do anything with romantic relationships, but there's a lot of wink wink nudge nudge on these two lesbian characters, and he's like, yeah, they're really good friends. I'm like, friends, quotation marks, like, and he's like, yeah,
just gals being pals.
Yeah.
No, that is kind of one of my favorite things, especially like also like in history when you'll like hear about that. It's like these two people, they wrote letters to each other every day and they asked to be buried next to each other. They were such good friends. And I was like, how straight and white and male of a historian do you need to be that you're like, they had such a close bond? And at this time, they really respected close friendships between two men. Yeah.
Yeah. But we've seen that in a number of Gertrude Stein biographies.
Yeah.
There's a lot of quotation friends in picture book biographies.
Yes, and they lived together because they were such good friends.
Yes.
The captions on some old photographs too in books, right? Where it's like, you know, like friends do it, and it's like, dude, that's the most romantic like gay picture I've ever seen. Like those are not
He's sitting
friends.
on his lap. What are you talking about? Things were just different then. Okay.
Photos of like my great aunt and her gal pals in the 20s, and some of them dress up as men and they're like posing in wedding photos with each other. These little like handwritten captions, you know, ain't misbehaving or something. I think they knew exactly what they were doing. It's wild.
I suspect that maybe you were misbehaving.
I think they were. They're having a good time.
Yeah. All right. Well, besides queer in the text and subtext that you are reading, have you all been watching anything interesting lately?
Well, James got me hooked on a specific show. Amanda's already laughing.
I see the text threads of this going back and forth. Yeah.
We're going to get Amanda on board. We are. So James got me hooked on Taskmaster. So it is a great British game show where actually, James, I should let you describe it because you're the one who introduced me to it.
No, go for it.
Are you sure? But you sold me on it and you can sell people.
Give the speech. Sell the audience, James.
I mean, the short version of it is like a lot of British shows, right? It's a game show, but the prizes are not really important, and the contestants are these comedians. But the sort of brilliance of it is that the writers keep coming up with these ridiculous tasks that these comedians are forced to perform to try and earn points from this sort of forbidding looking, 6'8" former middle school teacher stand-up comic whose job as the taskmaster is to be this sort of, I don't know, domineering force. It's the sort of comedy that wouldn't work in the United States at all, I don't think. But somehow the sort of insular British comedy world, they all know each other and they're also playful with each other. It's a hoot.
It's perfect, yeah. And for so many of like an American audience who like watches like the British Bake Show and like reads British like novels, like Richard Osman, who does the Thursday Murder Club, as a contestant for one of the seasons. It has several folks from the British Bake Show. Why am I spacing on the official name for that?
Because there are two different names depending on where you are.
Yeah, we can't say Bake Off in America because Pillsbury will get mad.
I mean,
we can.
The mad, so let's call it British Bake Off. This makes more sense now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's so exciting getting to see some of the familiar faces. So I have been watching that after James introduced me to it, and I just like howl with laughter every single episode. I feel like my poor neighbors are probably like, what is wrong with that girl in there? So I've been watching that. I am also gearing up to watch the final season of The Handmaid's Tale. So I've been watching the last season that came out because they took so long between their seasons, and I can scarcely remember what is going on. So I've been doing that. So it's, dystopian horror and comedy getting me through.
So I didn't realize they were still making it. So have they like surpassed what Margaret Atwood wrote in the book at this point?
They did by the first season,
Okay.
and then everything else has gone past it. But supposedly they're going to wrap up and leave space for them to do a spinoff into the Testaments. So her more recent book that came out.
Okay.
Which I think means we're not going to get a lot of resolution because the Testaments is kind of about getting the resolution.
Yeah.
Which I think is hard because, you've been with it for like 5 to 6 seasons at this point. You're like, oh, we know it's not going to wrap up because we have another one coming.
Yeah, that's one of those things that like I've been interested about, but like not to get too political on the podcast, but like in our current climate, I worry that it's just like gonna be too real.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never read the book and I haven't watched the show, and I don't know if I have it in me to do it.
That's my reaction to current times. Like all the pandemic books that came out, like when the pandemic was still fresh, I'm like, I don't want to read these. But then other people are just like, this is the comfort I need right now. And I feel like you fall in one of the two camps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like they made the Station 11 show, I think, fairly soon following the pandemic. And I haven't read the book, or because like the show was what brought the book to my attention. And I think my partner had read it already, and he was like, don't read it right now. You got to wait, because I don't think you'll feel good if you read it right now. But yeah, some people that is what
they need.
Yeah.
March of 2020, I was ordering books about plagues. And
Yeah.
I was reading them while in the height of quarantine.
Ugh.
Yep. Reading Colson Whitehead's book about zombies in Manhattan. Yeah. No, I am that person. I don't know why. It doesn't make much sense.
They're so intense, but they have to have some type of message of hope that kind of carries you through. So I feel like if they can go through that and it's so intense and there's this message of hope, like surely there must be some hope for us somewhere too. I feel like it gives me a little more faith in humanity and their ability to fight back against things like this.
That's what Star Trek is for, right?
Yes.
Hope for our future.
Yeah.
Well, Amanda, do you want to go next?
I'm kind of boring right now with TV shows. I mean, I guess like I enjoyed and was sad going to Star Trek, the last season of Lower Decks, which I just loved, and I'm sad that that's over. But I feel like since the election, I've just kind of fallen back into video games, talking about that escapism. So I've been playing a lot of World of Warcraft right now. Like it's like, just let me log on, see my quests, do all my things. Life makes sense. There's a little bit of excitement, but not enough to put me in the stress level of everyday life. So yeah, I think it's more video games for me right now.
That's good stuff. I don't want to seem all of my chips in on Tolkien here, but I mean, I will admit I'm incredibly obsessed with the Rings of Power. There are Tolkien nerds who are critical of it, and I don't know. I'm not at all sympathetic to their concerns, because I've been getting a lot out of it, having a lot of really good conversations with friends who are really into it. So that's been fun, and even like now we're months after like the end of the second season, I'm still like chewing on things or thinking back on things or going back to revisit an episode. Like Amanda, there's a lot of gaming at my house. Sometimes I'm watching the gaming on the big screen in my living room. Lots of Stardew happening on my screen, but I'm not playing it. I am playing a little bit of Civ 7 because I've been playing Civilization for 30 years now, and having a good time. And Tayla, you said like this is sort of all sorts of media, right? So I'll just drop a shout out to, like, I listen to podcasts while I cook or clean or whatever. Maybe a lot of us do. And so the podcast that I often return to and that I'm listening to right now is called Blank Check. It's a film podcast hosted primarily by a sort of comedian / actor and a film critic who writes for The Atlantic. But they do directors' filmographies. And so it's fun when it's a director I know. But right now it's a director I have very little familiarity with, Park Chan-wook, who's Korean, primarily sort of horror director. Not my scene, but it's fascinating to hear people talk about it. And the episode I'm listening to right now is one of my very favorite of their guests, Emily St. James, who's a wonderful trans film critic who I've been reading for a long time, since she wrote for Vox or The Onion or AV Club, somebody. Anyway, so it's I was having a good time this morning listening to some of that and thinking about movies that I honestly probably will never see, even though they sound pretty cool.
Yeah. I'm kind of also in a similar place where not a lot exciting in terms of like TV shows. I think we're gonna start the new Daredevil soon, but I've been trying to avoid like basically like any spoilers or any preconceived notions about it because I loved the Netflix Daredevil so much that I just want and the trailers keep making like when I watch a trailer I was like, this looks so good. I want it to be good. I want it to be good and for it to reignite my love of this fandom instead of like completely put me off from it. So I have my fingers crossed. I've heard it's more of the same. So if you liked the Netflix show, you'll get more of what you enjoyed. So I'm hoping that'll be the case. We did watch Greta Gerwig's Little Women, which I had never seen before. I also, which I know, everyone's like, how are you an English major? You've never read Little Women before. I know Ashley's face is saying the same thing, that the reaction I get from other people. I don't know. I was over in British Lit during my degree. I was over here taking Shakespeare courses and early modern British Lit courses, and I just like don't have a great depth of knowledge of American Lit. But just like as a movie and a story on its own, I just like kept having moments where I'm just like, this is so nice. You know what I mean? Like I just like, it was like a feast for the eyes. It was like warm and lovely and domestic. And I just was like, this is so nice. And my only one thought was just like, why is no one concerned that Lori didn't get the first sister, gonna wait 7 years and then marry this other sister? And this is totally a fine thing that everyone's fine with.
Different times, right? Different times. Things were different back then.
Yeah. I guess I was saying, like, there was just one more moment where Amy was all like, are you mad that I married Lori? And then she's just like, no, I'm not mad. I'm happy for you.
I feel like all the marriages are a little odd in Little Women. Like I feel like that's the weak part of the story for me. The characters themselves are great, but I
honestly forgot the marriage parts, but it's been like a long time since I've read it. So yeah.
And I don't, again, not being familiar with the source material, was it kind of told in a lot of flashbacks?
It's not. No, I went to watch it with my partner and I had to ask him like afterwards. I was like, hey, like just out of curiosity, because I've read the book so many times. It was one that my mom read to me growing up. I was like, did you feel confused by this because you didn't know like the chronology and what happened? And he's like, no, he's like, I actually feel like I followed it pretty well. I was like, okay, cool. Because I was watching it thinking, wow, if I was new to this story, I don't know if I'd understand how all these pieces were coming together.
The most confusing show I've ever seen for that was The Witcher, and I went in knowing nothing. And I was like 5 episodes in, and I was like, I texted my brother, I'm like, I'm missing something, aren't I? And he's like, oh, there's different time periods. I'm like, that makes sense now.
That's amazing.
But I could not tell.
That was how that book was written.
Yes.
Like the first book is a bunch of short stories that are at different times in Geralt's life.
But the filming, the way they put it together, it was very hard to tell what timeline you were in at any given point.
Oh yeah.
I hope Little Women wasn't like that.
No, I only had a few moments where I was just like, is this before she moved out or after? And then I'm like, okay, no, I figured it out. It's after.
And speaking of queer content, right? Like we keep coming back to it, but like there's a lot of talk around Blue Alcott and how Alcott presented themselves to others. Like it seems like at the very least she was doing some really interesting things with gender in the 19th century. And I don't know, we'll probably never really know the whole story. It's interesting for a person who is so famous for a book called Little Women, right? That just seems so like grounded in a particular gender like perspective.
She wrote Little Men too, though. So
it's not as good. It's not as good.
True. That is very true.
I have read it though. I do. I mean, it was good too.
Boys.
But yeah, I mean, I think Alcott is really interested in gender, but I don't know. I would really love to go back and reread them because Alicia, I read Little Women a bunch of times as a kid too. Have you reread it like in the last few years?
I have. I think probably the last 3 years. I've reread it since the beginning of the
Okay.
pandemic. It is much preachier to go back to as an adult, which I
Interesting.
found really
I'm sure.
interesting because I do return to some, like Anne of Green Gables. I read almost every year, and that one, like I go back and it's like the same feelings I felt like when I was younger. And then there's more complex ones too. But Little Women, I went back and I was like, oh no, this feels different. Just like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That's another one that I feel like I go back to, and I'm like, I loved this so much, but now like it pales in comparison to something like Tolkien that has such rich description and mythology behind it. So
there was one moment watching the film because they were sisters. So like on the page, it wasn't supposed to be gay, but I'm like, they're not really sisters. They're actors. But when Meg was getting married and then Joe was like, we should run away and you should be an actress and all right. And we'll run away to New York. I was like, that's the gayest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
Don't marry this man who you fell in love with slowly over time for him being such a kind and wonderful person. Run away with me. But yeah, then I had to be like, they're sisters, Tayla.
Right.
They're sisters.
This is back in that Tolkien zone, right? Where it's like, there's a lot of, subtext, but maybe the author wasn't thinking about much of it. Yeah, it's interesting.
Right. All right, so I want us to have enough time to talk about queer picture books and your research. So whoever would like to start to kind of describe briefly your research project and what inspired you to do this?
Briefly, eh?
I'm looking at all of us like, who's going to do it the most briefly?
I'm out. I think.
Okay. I don't want to admit the fact that I came to that conclusion.
Don't get too stressed about brief.
I can get us started on it.
Yeah,
please do.
For it.
So our inspiration for starting this project was the Diverse Bookfinder Project, which looks at picture books that have BIPOC characters. And it doesn't just question like how many books out there do we have with these characters, but it thinks about what type of stories are we telling about these characters. Because for example, if you have a library that has a collection that has a lot of books with BIPOC characters, but it's only showing them in situations of oppression and resilience, that's a problem. Like you might have a lot of representation of BIPOC characters, but it's not really giving you the wealth of stories and experiences that BIPOC characters should be experiencing. So James and I initially first met together and we were talking about that project, and we decided that we were curious about if you could take something like that and apply it to looking at books with queer characters instead. And so our research kind of went on from there, where we developed what was called the Rainbow Representation Rubric. And we look at picture books specifically that have queer characters, and we question what types of stories are being told about them. So we have 9 different themes, for example, and we explore, how those look overall together throughout. I think we've done pretty much back to 2004, 2005, we've hit most of the books, and we have kind of some sporadic coverage from before that. So we look as a whole, what are we seeing of these stories? And then we also look at are these stories changing from year to year?
I mean, I think that's a great summary. To maybe make it a little bit more relatable to people who read picture books, and maybe queer picture books, you have those books where maybe it's just a couple in the background that is, holding hands. But then you have books where you have a strong queer kid protagonist. And all of them, I think something important to think about is that all of these different types of rep are important, but it's important to have a balance of it. So you don't want all of your queer representation just being someone holding some sort of pride flag in the background of a picture, right? We don't want all of our kid protagonists, just like Alicia said, facing oppression and pushback, or only stories having a coming out story, right? We need all these different kinds. And so that's kind of like what Diverse Bookfinder was looking at, and more specifically for us is, one, how diverse is the publishing on this? And we have seen trends over time of the types of stories being told, because that determines what access librarians have to these stories. And then if these different types of stories are getting published, Are we creating balanced representation within our collections? Are we promoting certain books? When we do our Pride displays, are we only representing the queer experience as coming out in resilience? Or are we showing like the importance of, at one point the category was beautiful life, like these rich human experiences, or a non-binary kid just being a non-binary kid doing all sorts of kid things like everyone else.
One of the things that we were interested in too is the diversity of queer experiences, not just in narrative, but in terms of just literally like who are the people being represented. Some of the research from 15, 20 years ago was suggesting that the representation of LGBTQ people in picture books gravitated towards white, upper middle class, two-parent families. It was really trying to sort of emphasize the sort of normalization of like, look, this person is queer, but right, they're fine and they're good and they're whatever image we have of Americana. And so one of the things we wanted to pay attention to also is how often are queer characters being represented as people who are not white? How often are they being represented as people who have a disability? We're interested in, like, again, like a really rich representation of real life in which, in some stories, the fact that you're trans is not going to be the most important fact about your life. We're going to know it, but the story isn't about that. And sometimes it will be about that. So that's been really fascinating. I think also one of the things that has motivated us more and more over time is just realizing how scattershot the coverage is right now of how do you even know where representation is in picture books? So many partial lists have been made in so many different places. And one of our goals is to get a really comprehensive understanding, which means we have read hundreds of books. We have read hundreds of books that aren't in our data set because someone flagged them as saying, oh, this is representation. And the three of us have read it and said, it's not really doing what we would ask for in terms of representation. Tons of, picture book biographies of Elton John in which, sure, an adult reader knows that this is the biography of a gay man, but a kid wouldn't get it from a lot of the really cautious publishing that's happening out there. And so part of what we really want to do is spotlight and celebrate the fact that there are publishers that are daring enough to say, no, these are real people and these are their real lives. Well, sometimes they're fantastic lives, but most of it's pretty realistic.
Yeah, we do tend to avoid books that are just kind of queer coded, or books that as a queer person you may see yourself in that character. And I think it's important to note that we're not saying those books aren't important, but from a research standpoint, a lot of these lists that were generated in the past were kind of based on this feels queer, like this is a metaphor, an analogy for a queer experience. And as James was saying, we really wanted to see what's the data saying on explicitness. So all of our books have to have at least one character with a very clear, specific LGBTQI plus identity. And so if those biography books don't explicitly say, going back to they had a roommate, right? Like if it doesn't explicitly say, it doesn't make it to our final sample. And so I think that's important for people to know, because it doesn't mean that these are the only queer experience books out there. It's just for our study, we needed that explicit labeling of an identity.
Yeah, I think because it was important during a time where publishing was even more cautious than it is now, that we were kind of grabbing onto anything that we could grab onto. But now that there is more stories that are more explicit about it out there, I think it's important to highlight those stories and make sure that people are aware that they exist.
Yeah, because publishing trends have changed. And Alicia, I'm sure you all are going to have these conversations on the Rainbow Book List. But when you look at award winners and the books that made it onto these lists 15 years ago, it's very different than the books that are showing up today. And that's a good thing, because we know the rate of publications going up, the explicitness is going up without losing necessarily those other queer coded stories. But it is very, very important to be able to tell a diverse amount of stories. Anecdotally, we know what we were saying like 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of stories about kids with queer parents. And now we're seeing more stories with queer kids as the protagonists of their own stories. And that's huge.
Yeah, it's almost like 10, 15 years ago we were like, these adults can be queer, that's fine.
Yeah.
But let's not like encourage this going forward, where now we're like, no, queer people of all ages exist and have.
And that's an expansion of people understanding their queer identities. And I mean, we track, what is it, like 20 different identities?
Wow.
And I think that's really important because we've talked about in the past, when you consider queer just being gay and lesbian, well, picture books aren't really going to get into a lot of romances, right? But as we start to get these different identities, especially different gender identities, you can actually, that is a developmentally appropriate experience for preschool or early elementary children to be figuring out gender. And so we are seeing more of those stories versus, Love Violet is such a great developmentally appropriate romance picture book. Bobby and the Big Valentine, same one. But they're very different than having two moms or two dads.
So since we've already kind of dropped a few titles, I thought we could move into y'all giving your recommendations of this Pride Month. What books should parents, teachers, educators, librarians, appreciators of illustration should check out?
Amanda's looking so excited over there.
It's so hard. It's so hard.
I know we all have a lot of love for When Aiden Became a Brother by Kyle Lukoff. I think is one that we're always big fans of. Good transgender story. Beautiful. I love the illustrations in that book. I really like everything by Kyle Lukoff, so I would throw that one out there. Love Violet, as Amanda was talking about.
One of the things that's been fun about the project is discovering sort of unexpected representation. A book that I really like and I use a lot in my instruction is Salma the Syrian Chef by Danny Ramadan, which is a story primarily about culture and food and the refugee experience. But there are these gay men who are in the sort of secondary background, not just like figures we see illustrated, but they're supportive and friendly, and they're helping this refugee girl figure out how to make a meal. And it's lovely to see those kinds of representation and to recognize that's what we need is a landscape where sometimes this is a centered experience, but at other times it's just one of the many experiences happening.
The fun part of all this is that I get to read a lot of books to my kiddo, who is 8 now. So he's been kind of a guinea pig for a lot of these books for years. But Bathe the Cat is a family favorite, and it is so much fun. And it's this family. You're not totally clear on all the specific queer identities. There's some pride flags on the fridge that you think may apply to a certain character, but it's 2 dads and 3 kids, and grandma's coming, and they make a list of to-do items on the fridge with those little magnet letters, and the last assignment is bathe the cat, and the cat's like, what? No. So every few pages, the cat scrambles the letters, and then it's like, Bobby washed the lawn, Sally vacuums the dishes, and nothing's getting done. And my kiddo, I think it's just a great story time one, because he would put his little hands on the page and scramble up the letters like the cat. And it's just, he's been reading that since it came out, and he still loves it. I think Mr. Watson's Chickens is a funny one. It's one of those, you end up with 100 chickens, and what do you do with 100 chickens? And there's a little bit of a Where's Waldo element when you see all the chickens across all the page. That's a fun one too. There's just so many.
Amanda was talking about having a sort of in-house guinea pig to read to. My guinea pig is slightly older, but still has had a lot of books read to her. And it's funny, like I haven't read most of these books to her in several years. Like there was a lot of reading aloud to her when I was first generating some of the sample. But just the other day I mentioned that the 3 of us are going to a library conference to present and to share about books. And she said, you've got to take I Am Jazz. Like, I don't think she's read Jazz Jennings' picture book biography in years, but it's absolutely stuck in her head. And so I think that's the funny thing of like all of these books are probably somebody's favorite. Maybe not all, but I mean, we
We've read some bad ones. There are some that it's like,
we should emphasize, our whole data set is not a list of recommended books.
No.
Oh, okay.
Because we're just trying to capture, like, is there representation out there? Even if sometimes we think, that's not very well illustrated, or that story's kind of flat. But so many of the books we read really are, it's just exciting to see the kind of representation that I know I didn't read, would never have encountered as a kid. And it would have been so simple to grow up just understanding that, right, there's lots of different ways of being, the way that my kid is growing up. And so it's lovely to see it in these books.
And I'm often surprised by what my kiddo enjoys. We just went on a short family trip and we said, hey, bud, go pick some picture books for reading at night. And he was like, where's my rainbow? We haven't read my rainbow in years. And I love that book. And I was like, you love that book? And my kiddo, he is we talked earlier, Sonic the Hedgehog, gaming, Fortnite, any like basketball, like all this stuff. And my rainbow is just this beautiful book of this autistic trans girl who wants to have pretty hair, but because of sensory issues, she can't grow it out. And he loves this book. It's one he keeps going back to over and over and over again. So I think people should be open to, if they haven't brought in queer picture books into their family, just trying them out, because you might be surprised which ones the kiddos like. And it may be something you did not picture that specific kid really gravitating to.
And to recognize that, because obviously there are people who have their apprehensions about, like, oh, well, what am I going to be influencing? I don't know that the four of us on this conversation will feel that way, but certainly there are a lot of folks who feel that way. It's not been my experience, kind of like Amanda's saying, it's not my experience that a child loves a book and immediately thinks, oh, well, I have to be that person, any more than, okay, maybe, Amanda, your kiddo would like to be Sonic the Hedgehog. I don't know. But
maybe, right?
But much of the time, right, we just get excited by a story. And sometimes what's exciting about it is just that it's so different from us. And that's part of what we like about it. So I think that's what I would hope people would realize, is that these kinds of encounters, even if they're not with the world's best versions of these books, are just a chance for understanding.
And they're all, we've read, like James said before, hundreds and hundreds of books. We have, I think, 300 and something books that made it to our final sample, like 350, I think, something like that. And there's this lot of talk about, like, is this stuff appropriate for these age groups? And nothing in any of there was maybe one book that I'd be like, that would let me have an awkward conversation with my son. Like, out of like 350 books, none of this stuff is developmentally inappropriate. And my kiddo has never batted an eye with any of these books. Some of them he likes, some of them he thinks are boring. But none of these books have opened up that's an awkward conversation to have with my child now. And I know that's something that people talk about a lot now. And when I share these books with my students too, they're often surprised by, like, I don't understand why people think this isn't age appropriate.
Yeah, we're already at 3:00 because I have a lot of thoughts. But I guess briefly, I will say, I think a lot of it is a sexualization of queer people that doesn't happen to straight people.
Correct.
Like, I feel like people go to this place that they're all like, oh my God, there are queer people in this book. Now I have to explain what queer sex is like to my child. When you see straight couples on the street, you're like, okay, we need to stop so that I can explain to you how straight couples have sex. No, you're just like, those people love each other just like your parents love each other. And when queerness comes in, it becomes this weird thing where people suddenly feel like it needs to become about sex. Right. And it really doesn't.
These books are not sexualizing children.
Yeah.
And there are sex education books that we have read. None of them tell you what you're saying, right? It's just...
None of them are an instruction manual.
There are laws already in place about giving pornography to children, right? Like,
yeah.
Well, and Alicia, like the books you would particularly pick to spotlight, they are romances, but what's the tone of a romance in a picture book?
Yeah. it's just, how we experienced when we were first or second graders, wanting to give a Valentine's to somebody and feeling unsure about how that would be received.
Right.
And even romances with, like, Prince and Knight is Tale of the Shadow Prince or something was another one of my kiddos' favorite, right? The two, the prince and the knight character, they're in love, they're married. It's no different than when you see a prince and a princess in a Disney movie, right? Like, it's the same level.
Yeah, they're off saving the land. There are other concerns and focal points.
So if people want to find out more, where they should go, or anything like that before we wrap up. I know if it's academic research, you can't just be like, go and find it here because capitalism. But yeah.
That is a good question. I will say, because we've done mini conference presentations and things of that nature, and we do have what's called digital repositories at each of our universities that point to all of our research. So if you were to search for any of our names, you'd be able to get to our materials. We have worked on a list that we were putting into what's called Zotero to kind of link to all these different books, but we did do a big revision project on how we were analyzing books over last year. It took a long, we had to reread most of the books in our sample. So we are still in the process of updating that, but at some point that will be available to share and see as well.
But remember, we're not recommending all these books.
So true. Yes, so true.
I say this for any book that when I work with my students, I do this with graphic novels too. Like, before you bring a book to a child, especially if it's like a graphic novel, or picture books are really easy to look at first, read it first. I do this with my kiddo with certain topics in history that are a lot of bad sides, and how do I know what to tell him at his age level versus what he will learn in high school. So I read things first. So if you use our Zotero and you find a list of books, just peruse them before you introduce them to a child, because it is an academic exercise versus a recommendation list.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, if you are looking for our stuff, though, in addition to what Alicia and Amanda have mentioned, if you search for the Rainbow Representation Rubric, that is the name we use pretty consistently to describe our tool. And Library Juice Press just published a book. It's not exactly light reading, but it's a collection of essays called Censorship as a Drag that talks about what's going on surrounding LGBTQ materials, primarily in academic libraries, but they're also talking about public libraries and secondary school libraries. And we have a chapter in there talking a little bit about cataloging language and the ways in which library catalogs sometimes do disclose the contents of a book, but oftentimes aren't very good at helping people identify where there's representation in the books that are sitting on the shelves.
I'm going to promote the Rainbow Book List. Is a fantastic place for people to start finding materials for their young ones. It goes from birth to age 18. It's always an amazing group of people. Alicia, as she said, is on this for next year's list.
I am.
And it's a great place to start.
All right, fantastic. So we wrap up the show with a segment I call The Last Chapter, where we talk about a library of bookish related questions. So I thought I would ask you all, would you rather have a personal library with unlimited space but only filled with books you've never read, or a small collection of books that you've read and loved but no space for new books?
That's an evil question.
I can take this one. I can go first, because I know I do love reading new things, but I am a huge rereader. So I would take a small collection that didn't have room for new books, which is kind of sad. I'm glad at this point that I've read many queer books, because then they could make their way into there. Because there's definitely been times in my life where it would have been a very limited collection. But I do have so many books that I reread that I couldn't say goodbye to them. I just wouldn't be able to.
Are you allowed to read outside of this collection, or is this like a deserted island where that's all you have to read for the rest of your life?
That's a good question.
Okay, I'm gonna say that you can read outside of this collection. This is just talking about owning books.
I'm with Alicia. I would own, because that's kind of what I do. I own the things that I love, that what brings me joy, even if I'm just holding it. Yeah. And then I'd use my public library to get all the books I haven't read yet.
James, I feel like you're going to have to go with that too, because how could you ever put Tolkien behind you?
It'd be very, very hard. Yeah. I think, like, to speak on behalf of the Library of Brand New Books, I do discover that I have prejudices about books that are undone once I start reading them, where I think, oh, I don't really like a book like X. But then for one reason or another, I find myself picking it up and starting to read it and realizing, oh, yeah, okay. My little 2-person book club where like sometimes it's a pick of mine, but sometimes it's a pick of my friends. And I think, okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, we can read that. And then I get 2 or 3 chapters in and I think, oh, I do like this. So I think it's certainly good for me to read new things. But yeah, you're talking to 3 obsessive rereaders. People who are so committed to the project of rereading that we forcibly reread hundreds of picture books we had already read and classified for good reasons.
Because we had new thoughts on them.
We did have new thoughts. But yeah, there is something about going back to a book. I think the beauty of not just discovering something new in the book, but like you just said, Amanda, that like I'm different now too, and the book helps me see it. I mean, that's something that is a real gift that art gives us. I don't want to lose that.
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with everyone here, kind of similar to Amanda, because that is kind of what I do right now. A very small percentage of books on my bookshelf are unread by me. And it's mostly because they were like arcs that I got at ALA that I did think were interesting. I don't know. I'm also very much like a mood reader. So it's like I get these things, but then I'm like, I'm not in the mood to read this right now. And then that just happens indefinitely, even though it's not that I'm not interested in the book, because I am. And then it becomes a thing where I was like, well, this book is probably published now in the real version. Not that the arcs aren't real, but you know what I mean. Like
that is a real struggle.
It's probably out now, so maybe I should just do that. But still, that's a very small part of my bookshelf. Majority of my bookshelf is just things that I wanted to own, and not necessarily because I'm a big rereader, even though I have reread some of them. But mostly, I don't know. I just feel a sense of like, it's almost like decoration. You know what I mean? Like it's part of your decor for your home of like, these are books and these are my books and I love all of them.
It's not much different than putting artwork up on your walls, right? The same thing, for me at least, the same feeling I get from looking at a piece of artwork that I really love is the same as looking at a shelf of books that I really love.
All right. So we're just all going to continue to use the public library.
As everyone should.
We all should.
All right. So thank you all for joining me, and thank you everyone for listening. If you would like to respond to our last chapter question or just reach out to the show, you can send us an email at overdoingitpod@gmail.com, or you can find us on Instagram at overdoingitpod. And overdoing it is spelled overdue, like all the library books at my house. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend and rate and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help us reach more Rhode Islanders. Overdoing It is proud to be a resident partner of the Rhode Island Center for the Book and is brought to you by library staff and community members all around the Ocean State. The project has been funded in part by the Rhode Island Office of Library and Information Services. Thank you for listening, and this has been another episode of Overdoing It, the Rhode Island Library Podcast. We're overdoing it, but you're doing just fine.
Oh, I love that tagline.
That's so cute.
That's cute.
Good.
Thank you.
That is cute.
But before we get into that, let's start off a... Oh my God. Well, I can't speak today.
Do you need the venti tea?
I do, but I spilled it on my pants.
I want that to make the podcast.
Yeah.